Benedict XVI welcomed a delegation from the B'nai B'rith community to the Vatican. In Hebrew, their name means Sons of the Covenant, and they're the oldest Jewish service group organization in the world. They work on projects of community service and provide scholarships to Jewish youth. The Pope noted that the group plays an important role in Jewish-Catholic relations, as well as providing much-needed charity throughout the world. Members of the B'nai B'rith community asked for continued support from the Vatican for the State of Israel and denounced the wave of religious persecution towards Christians in other countries throughout the Middle East. During the meeting, Benedict XVI also noted the cooperation between Jews and Catholics over the past year, between the Chief Rabbinate of Israel and the Holy See. 2011 also marks the 40th anniversary of meetings between the International Catholic Jewish Liaison Committee.
Welcome to episode 2, guys. As I said, hope you enjoyed that information that you guys got to hear on the first episode. So now take the time to listen and hit that like, hit the subscribe button. We appreciate all your support. I'm not doing any of this to be big on the internet, but I'm super grateful for you guys to tune in. 99% of the people that watch my videos, or 96, I think, they're not subscribed. And I would really appreciate if I earned your subscription today. So anyhow, just enjoy this episode. So now on episode 2, guys, you ever heard of the term 666? Where did 666 come from? Or maybe the year 1666. Why is that so important? Where did Zionism's origins and beliefs and thought process, where did all of that originate? All of that originated from a belief system from a guy named Sabbati Zvi. And after Sabbatai Zvi spawned an even worse human being named Jacob Frank. Sabbatai Zvi has had a horrible reputation within the Jewish community for being a false messiah, but at the time he influenced over the majority of the Jewish population on earth during the year 1666 because people were looking for some messianic figure. And there's also a guy that was known prior to Sabbatai Zvi, which has a bad reputation in the Jewish community, but not so much in the Christian Protestant community. He has a controversial take, but his name was Martin Luther. Sounds strange, right? And then the Jewish community came up with another guy that they sponsored later by the Weishaupt named Martin Luther King. But his real name was not Martin Luther King. His real name was Michael Luther King. But we'll touch a bit about that leading into the next episode. But long story short, Martin Luther had an issue with the Jewish community because he felt that they were practicing heresy. They were practicing forms of inhumane arts and things of that sort. That kind of goes back into this whole Talmudic Babylonian thing that has pervaded throughout that group as far as the things that they adopted and became culture. And so that obviously made its way within the Khazarian Empire when they converted to Judaism and when they moved further into Europe. And so there's always been this reputation of European Jews being displaced and kicked out in all different kinds of places in Europe and passed around. The reason why that has been prevalent is because of this Babylonian Talmud and some of the belief systems that is in that ideology. So Sabbatai Zvi essentially became this figure that was highly regarded, and Martin Luther was kind of concerned about a supposed messianic figure coming later because he saw the Jewish community were looking for someone else outside of Jesus, and their thoughts on Jesus is quite disturbing or whatever, quite dark. But long story short, he didn't like the fact that they were looking for another figure to worship and honor, or someone else to come along. And so you'll see that there's a pattern also throughout history of Jews finding one guy, like the leader of the Chabad community, of Orthodox Jews, Hasidic Jews, and they'll prop somebody up and just go, he's the next chosen one. They kind of doing that in some regard with Benjamin Netanyahu, between certain communities and certain groups within those communities. So in general, the way that European Jews got pushed around, it was pretty much because Sabbati Zvi spawned, and he created this system for Jews to believe in that essentially said that in order for there to be a return of the Messiah or the chosen person, that either Jews had to be 100% good or 100% bad. And he decided that it was more easy to convince people to sin and do bad and try to make the whole world bad than it was to try to make the whole entire world good and ethical. Because equality in itself is nearly impossible, because nothing on the earth is equal. But he felt it was easier to try to be equal and evil. So this guy decided to do everything that was opposite of any holy books and say, if there's any good deed, do the opposite. So sit back, enjoy yourselves. This is also going to crack your brain open and you're going to be baffled, but you'll begin to understand why there's such lack of empathy and why there has been a pervading pattern between that particular group of supposedly being told that they were causing disturbances in different parts of the world. And a lot of it had to do with the Talmud, but by far deeper and darker after Sabbati Zvi and Jacob Frank. Enjoy.
This behind us, this was the first synagogue that was built in Sarajevo in 1581. It was built by an Ottoman Sultan. He gifted it to the Jewish community in Sarajevo. Before this, in the Balkans, there was minimal Jewish presence, but in 1490, the Jews in Spain were persecuted by the Christians. So the Ottomans told the Jews, you can have safe refuge into the Ottoman Balkans. The Ottomans had their policy of religious tolerance. There was the idea of the millet system, essentially where ethnicities and different religions could rule in accordance to their own religious law. The percentage of Jews in Sarajevo was about 20%, which is a lot. However, after the Ottoman Empire, there's 600 Jews today living. 600 Jews. Muslims, since time began, if you look at Umar radiallahu anh, when he came and conquered Jerusalem, he allowed the Jews to reside in Jerusalem. Then you have a look at Salah ad-Din, he allowed the Jews to reside in Jerusalem. In Spain, Muslims also allowed Jews to reside in what was known as Andalusia. And now again, the Ottomans, the Muslims, allowed the Jews to have refuge in these lands.
In the 17th century, and I'll make this brief, the details all in the book, a man emerged, a Jewish man called Sabbati Zvi, and he claimed to be the Jewish Messiah. Messiah had arrived. And he gathered behind him a phenomenal following. All the stuff about this in the book comes from Jewish sources who know about this. And he had 1 million followers at one point. We're looking at the 17th century.
He enters the city and is surrounded by hundreds of people, confident that he's the Messiah. At this time, in 1666, we have heavy evidence that most of Jews in the diaspora, from Yemen to Amsterdam, are believers in Sabbati Zvi. Synagogues had prayers for him. His picture was printed next to King David's in many prayer books with an inscription, "Save our people." And Jews who opposed him said, we are living in messianic times, but Sabbati Zvi is not the Messiah. But they couldn't say this out loud, as they'd be beaten. Sephardic and Ashkenazic Jews had a similar response. Sabbateanism helped unite the diaspora, showing that both sides had the same issues and expectations, and the same messianic craze. These were Jewish communities that had never spoken to each other before.
Sabbati Zvi was born in 1626 to a wealthy merchant family in Smyrna, a town on the west coast of Turkey known as Izmir today. He rose to be a charismatic rabbi and Kabbalist who, in 1666, declared himself to be the Messiah. This eccentric mystic managed to attract over 1 million devotees during his lifetime. a remarkable achievement given this was about half of the Jewish population in the 17th century. Thanks to the printing press in the previous century, the Lurianic Kabbalah, named after the famed Rabbi Isaac Luria, was broadly disseminated, allowing Jews everywhere access to the occult literature. Popularity of Jewish mysticism was on the rise during a time of persecution, and it was on this stage that Sabbatai Zevi stepped up to the podium. Drawing from ancient Babylonian occultism and interpretations of the Kabbalah, Sabbatai promoted the concept and practice of redemption through sin. There was a growing sense of hopelessness among the Jewish population for the long-awaited Messiah. Sabbatai played on the widely held expectation that the Messiah would return in 1646, and announced during an episode of Illumination that he was indeed that Messiah. He was a man of charming personality, handsome, possessed an enchanted singing voice, and radiated an angelic aura, according to some first-hand reports. Converting the masses seemed to have come easily, with many rabbis confessing to have had dreams of Sabbatai appearing to them as the Messiah. Here was a charismatic mystic who seemed to fit the bill of a Messiah, although his illuminated episode suggested something less than divine. Some interpret his behavior as bipolar, others some form of psychotic disorder, or maybe possessed. Regardless, his esoteric mysticism, replacing Jewish law with depraved and immoral behavior, had him expelled from Smyrna in the early 1650s. Sabbatai resurfaced in 1658 in Constantinople, where preacher Abraham Yachini declared Sabbatai's messianic destiny. With a document forged by the Talmudic scholar Joseph Trani, prophesying Sabbatai's legitimacy, Sabbatai went to Salonika to proclaim himself the Anointed One. However, he was soon banished from the city by the local rabbis, sending him on a journey through a handful of major cities before settling in Cairo in 1660. Here, he was supported by a wealthy and influential Jew, Raphael Joseph Halabi, who promoted Sabbati's messianic claims. Moving to Jerusalem around 1663, he once again garnered a large following, in no small part due to his rich and powerful connection in Cairo, who may have been able to ease the Ottoman tax burden in Jerusalem. When he was sent to Cairo to appeal to Raphael Joseph Halabi on behalf of the Jerusalem Jews, another event took place that further elevated his fame. There was a Jewish orphan named Sarah from a Polish Christian convent, who at 16 had made her way to Amsterdam and then Italy, where she became a prostitute. She was also convinced that she would be the bride of the Messiah. Sabbatai, after hearing the story of Sarah, claimed that he had been promised in a dream that he would fall in love with an unchaste woman, not unlike the prophet Hosea, and that Sarah was the one. He sent for her, and they were married. Her eccentric character and beauty apparently gained the would-be Messiah even greater fame. Sabbatai and his new wife went back to Jerusalem, where he met Nathan Benjamin Levi, known as Nathan of Gaza, and who saw himself as the risen Elijah who would usher in the Messianic age. Nathan announced 1666 would see the conquest of the world and the beginning of the Messiah's reign. But the rabbis of Jerusalem were less than impressed and threatened to excommunicate Sabbatai and his followers. Sabbatai retreated to his native Smyrna, where he would be more readily accepted as the Messiah. It was in Smyrna and in Philadelphia, about 105 miles east, that the book of Revelation describes a synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie. By 1665, Sabbatai had become an international sensation, with many prominent rabbis clinging to his claims. However, this was short-lived. By 1666, after Sabbatai's plans to abolish a host of Jewish rituals shocked many of the previously sympathetic Jews. He left Smyrna, probably kicked out early in 1666, and went on to Constantinople. It was here, however, that he was swiftly arrested and imprisoned by the Sultan of Turkey. Even in prison, Sabbatai was able to spin the whole ordeal in his favor. garnering more fame and prayers as stories of the miraculous deeds of this Messiah were disseminated and the messianic craze intensified. Hungarian Jews unthatched their roofs in preparation for the end of their exile, and Jews in Amsterdam prepared to sell their homes. In Hamburg synagogues, Jews would be dancing and jumping in jubilation over the coming redemption. This would continue until a certain Nehemiah HaKohen managed to get word to Sultan Mehmed IV, who became aware of Sabbatai's ambitions. Things would end abruptly for Sabbatai when, on September 15, 1666, the Turkish Sultan gave him three choices: be tested regarding his divinity by avoiding a volley of arrows, be impaled, or convert to Islam. Other commentators say he was offered two choices, Islam or beheading. It is not certain exactly what happened, but Sabbatai's choice was clear. He chose to convert to Islam the next day on the 16th, along with his wife and 300 families who were following him. He also took on a second wife to confirm his conversion and was employed as the Sultan's doorkeeper. He wrote to the community at Smyrna saying, "God has made me an Ishmaelite. He commanded, and it was done. The 9th day of my regeneration." Not to be outdone, Sabbatai's right-hand man, Nathan, perpetuated an alternative interpretation of events. Apparently, Sabbatai's conversion to Islam was all about descending in order to reclaim the lost spark of divine light that was required to repair the world. Such mystical actions based on Gnostic ideas must have impressed some faithful followers, but for the majority, there was just disillusionment. Sabbatai died in isolation on September 17, 1676, not having ushered in the Messianic age. Nevertheless, a remnant of Sabbateans remained, and a revival would come about in the 18th century under Jacob Frank, who claimed to be a reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi. Frank expanded on the ideas of Sabbatai, including the idea of redemption through sin, a paradoxical teaching that the coming Messianic age transforms sexual prohibitions into permissions and even obligations. Frank taught that engaging in sexual orgies was the way to purify the soul from sin. In an extreme departure from morality, he insisted that child sacrifice, rape, incest, and the drinking of blood were acceptable and necessary religious rituals. This was all part of his philosophy that, to usher in a new society, there must be the destruction of the old, albeit done in secret, a doctrine called the Way of Esau. He also endorsed the Gnostic idea that the biblical God was evil and not the creator. In total rejection of the Torah and traditional interpretations, Frank converted to both Islam and Catholicism, slept with his followers, including his daughter, and preached that the imitation of God was to transgress every taboo, cross every boundary, and mix the sacred with the profane. As part of the secret mission of his believers, Frank convinced his followers that, just as Sabbatai had descended into Islam, they should outwardly become Christians to conceal the secrets of their faith. Frank led 60,000 European Jews in baptism into the Catholic Church. Although his following was something like 20 times less than Sabbatai, his nihilistic mystical cult did have powerful European royalty, nobility, and bankers among its ranks, a remarkable feat given Frank's totally corrupt and degenerate philosophy. According to Frank, one must be free of all laws, conventions, religions, all positive systems of belief, and commit strange acts of voluntary abasement in utter disregard to authority in order to descend into the abyss and fix the soul. This was to be done in silence with deceit, the so-called burden of silence. And then in the 1770s there came about a powerful alliance in Frankfurt, when Jacob Frank would join forces with another secret society and a very wealthy individual. Johann Adam Weishaupt was the son of Jewish parents who had converted to Catholicism in Bavaria. His father, a professor of law, died when Adam was just 5 years old. Adam was educated by the Jesuits, learning 5 languages and becoming a professor of canon law at the University of Ingolstadt. When he was just 28, he founded the Orden der Perfectibilisten, otherwise known as the Illuminati, named in honor of Lucifer, the bearer of light, on May 1st, 1776. His secret society had a list of long-term goals of abolishing monarchies, governments, private property, inheritances, patriotism, nationalism, family life, marriage, religion, and to establish communal education for children. Socialist phenomenon that had long been grasped by various groups through the centuries, and indeed would be foundational to Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. In short, the Illuminati Manifesto was to secretly rule the world by establishing a new world order. The Illuminati then successfully infiltrated the Masonic lodges for their power and influence in society. Weishaupt was calculating, scheming, immoral and narcissistic. A French Jesuit priest who studied Weishaupt in the late 18th century said he was an odious phenomenon in nature, an atheist void of remorse, a profound hypocrite destitute of those superior talents which lead to the vindication of truth. He is possessed of all that energy and ardor in vice which generates conspirators for impiety and anarchy. Shunning like the ill-boding owl the genial rays of the sun, he wraps around him the mantle of darkness, and history shall record of him, as of the evil spirit, only the black deeds which he planned or executed. The third member of this trio was Mayer Amschel Rothschild, founder of the Rothschild dynasty, who provided financial backing for the work of the Illuminati and brought the Sabbatian Frankists, sometimes referred to as the cult of the all-seeing eye, into a secret yet powerful trinity. This cabal, initially working through Freemasonry, was dedicated to bring about a new world order. Recruits to this cabal were intelligent men from the arts, science, business, and politics. They were tasked with social engineering, using tactics such as bribery, extortion, opportunity promotion, scholarships, whatever was necessary to steer policies and people in whatever direction was required. But was this cabal just looking for world domination through a new world order? It seems there was a deeper motivation, a motivation to usher in the Messiah and Messianic age, in which, of course, this new enlightened cabal would rule and reign. This was to be done by the increase of sin, by turning the established moral code on its head, destroying, no less, the European heterosexual Christian character of Western society. The destruction of Christianity, monarchies, nationalism, family and marriage, private property and any collective identity would all be key features of this spiritual and political revolution. The promotion of promiscuity and all manner of sexual deviance, undermining nationalism, race, gender, and promoting diversity and the universal brotherhood, would all play a part in a kaleidoscopic Hegelian dialectic of East and West, of communism and capitalism, of rich and poor, black and white, male and female, resolving everything into the expected synthesis of a one-world order. This grand scheme could not possibly be done without the Rothschilds purchasing and thus controlling Reuters and other influential news agencies. This gave the cabal the means to control the narrative through the most influential press outlets in Europe. Additionally, the Anti-Defamation League, established in 1913, gave cover for the cabal's activities, slandering anyone who dared question the Rothschilds' agenda as being anti-Semitic. And to empower even more an already powerful dynasty, Congress voted on the Rothschilds' Federal Reserve Act in December 1913. Woodrow Wilson, the president at the time, said later in his book, The New Freedom,
"However it has come about, it is more important still that the control of credit also has become dangerously centralized. It is the mere truth to say that the financial resources of the country are not at the command of those who do not submit to the direction and domination of small groups of capitalists who wish to keep the economic development of the country under their own eye and guidance. The great monopoly in this country is the monopoly of big credits. So long as that exists, our old variety and freedom and individual energy of development are out of the question. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is privately concentrated."
And concentrated indeed was the power of these illuminated elites with a view to rule the world. The stage was set for this Illuminati, Sabbatian Frankists, Rothschild trio to manipulate the world stage throughout the 20th century. Has the legacy of Sabbatai Zevi become fuel for a cabal of elite religious ideologues, hell-bent on ruling the world through a stranglehold on politics, finance, and the media?
And he created a cult which inverted everything. This is the whole basis of it. So whatever Judaism stood for, it would invert and do the opposite. And people who want to discredit me are going to say he's saying 9/11 was a Jewish plot. I am absolutely not saying that. In fact, I'm saying the opposite. And that's why I say in the book that no one needs to read this book more urgently than the Jewish community of the world to see how they've been shafted by this inversion. And this cult became known as Sabbateanism. And so if you had a day in Judaism, which was a day of fasting, then in Sabbateanism, it would be a day of feasting. They inverted everything. So if you had a taboo about sex with children, Sabbateanism would not only remove the taboo, it would make it something to be desired, something to do. And the way they sold this in this cult was that the more evil you do, basically the quicker God will come and sort it out. I mean, I know, but that's how they sold it. And this cult eventually led to a point where Sabbati Zvi was in the Ottoman Empire in Turkey. And he was given a choice by the Sultan to either renege on his Sabbateanism religion and become a Muslim, or he'd get business. And he decided that he would considering it, I think I'll become a Muslim. But of course, that was only on the surface. And Sabbateanism, and so many were following Sabbati Zvi, followed Sabbateanism within the apparently conversion to Islam. And these people became known in the Islamic world as the Donmeh, which means to turn. And one of the things that I show in the book is that these Donmeh ended up infiltrating the Islamic religion and becoming the Saudi royal family and creating, I explain the background and the history, in league with the British Empire, the Wahhabi form of extreme Islam, which manifests as the Saudi Arabian version and of ISIS, Islamic State. These are creations of the Donmeh, who are not Muslim, but Sabbateans, a cult, a satanic cult, which, by the way, as I make clear and Jewish sources make clear in the book, hate Jewish people, hate them with a vengeance.
Some followed him in converting to Islam, the Donmeh. They secretly practiced Jewish traditions within Islam. This group lasted for hundreds of years. In the 1920s, they numbered 15,000.
And what this Sabbateanism then became in the next century, the 18th century, was what I call in the book, right to present day, Sabbatean Frankism. And this is because of a man called Jacob Frank, who has been described by Jewish sources as basically one of the most evil people ever to emerge in the Jewish community.
Mannheim, 1725. A traveling bookseller from Poland is arrested on behalf of the local rabbis. His name, Moses Meir Kamenker, will be little remembered by history, but what he's brought with him will not. And I Will Come to the Eye Today, a manuscript extolling the long-dead messianic claimant Shabbatai Zvi. Sabbateanism should have ended in 1666, when Shabbatai Zvi abandoned his messianic claims and converted to Islam. Sabbateanism continued slowly dying out in Western Europe, just as it had been before. Eastern Europe was a different story. Following the Treaty of Bucioch in 1672, Poland had ceded the region of Podolia to the Ottoman Empire, leading the local Jewish community there to develop much closer ties with their brethren in Greece and Anatolia. And although Poland regained the territory in 1699, The Jewish Sejm found it almost impossible to regain judicial control there. At various points, the council had planned to split Podolia off into a new thschild for better oversight, but this was never implemented, and so it became a haven for nonconformists. This was the environment under which Hasidism was first able to flourish.
You're not going to believe this. So, on this next portion right here that you're about to watch, you're about to find the founder of the Hasid movement. His name was Baal. Baal Shem Tov.
In its wake, a massive following of Jews flocked to the charismatic Rabbi Sabbati Zvi in hopes of redemption, only to be left hopeless and betrayed when he converted to Islam. Many Jews were so poor that they couldn't spare time to study the Torah or practice their religion. Into this gap stepped a most unusual man, the Baal Shem Tov. The early decades of his life are shrouded in mystery. He may have studied with secretive Jewish mystics, and he likely supported himself by mining for clay.
Tanya is the seminal work, it's the primary work of Chabad Hasidus. So to understand really what Tanya is all about, we have to understand what Hasidus is all about, and it's a little bit of history. So if you go back to, I actually wrote an article about it in the Mosaic, that's why I have it here. So look at the dates. Late 1600s, and then through the late 1600s, and then later in the mid 1700s, there was the Sabbati Zvi movement. The movement began by Sabbati Zvi, which declared himself a messiah, and he led many Jews astray. And then he was in the late 1600s, and then in the 1700s there was his successor, Jacob Frank, who claimed to be reincarnation or something like that of Sabbati Zvi himself. And he took a lot of Jews, and there was a lot of heresy that came along with that. And he was using language of Kabbalah. That's one thing that happened at that time. So there was a spiritual threat, if you will, within the Jewish world. In addition to that, during this time, there's a lot of poverty and social distress. And Jews are not in a wealthy state. Today, relatively speaking, we're in a very wealthy state, but back then, Jews were not like that. So what ended up happening is, because of this social poverty and the spiritual threats, what ends up happening is the educated and the wealthy few start to insulate, right? Because there's all these threats from the outside. So what ends up happening is when there's all these threats from the outside, you end up insulating more and more. So over time, what happened is this culture started to look down at the masses of Jews. The Jews the mass of uneducated Jews were looked down upon, and what was celebrated in these circles was scholarship and piety, at least self-perceived piety. As opposed to my service of God becoming my source of humility, my Torah itself becomes a source of my detriment, my own ego. And that's what happens in these cultures, that's what happened at least then, where these scholarly elite who, look down on all these simple things, they can't read Hebrew, God doesn't know me, I'm a pious man, who knows what God thinks about me? So in this climate, the Baal Shem Tov comes along and goes from town to town, small towns, and starts preaching to these simple Jews that God loves you, you have a soul, and you're infinitely precious to Hashem, and the smallest thing you do is the most precious thing in God's eyes. This was a threatening version of Judaism, especially considering the fact that he was using language of Kabbalah, and the memory of Sabbati Zvi is fresh in their minds. And Sabbati Zvi's movement, which led people astray, was using Kabbalistic language. So they looked at the whole Hasidic movement. This was where the opposition to the Hasidic movement.
Hi, my name is Abby Stein. I'm an odd and proud, transgender, queer, formerly Orthodox Hasidic Jew.
When you think of New York City, what comes to mind? Is it bright lights and billboards? Crazy fashion? Or guys dressed like Elmo in Times Square? What if I told you that there's a whole nother side to New York City, one that is often left unnoticed? A short walk from Manhattan over the Williamsburg Bridge, south of Hipsterland, is home to the most concentrated Hasidic Jewish community in America. Hasidic Jews moved to this part of Brooklyn around the time of World War II, many escaping harsh living conditions in the Lower East Side, and many of them Holocaust survivors themselves. As a Jewish traveler, I've wanted to visit this neighborhood for decades. Now I'm finally here, and I could not be more excited about my guide. I teamed up with Abby Stein, a Williamsburg native who left the Hasidic world behind to live her truth as a transgender woman. Today, she is an author, activist, blogger, model, speaker, and rabbi. And did I mention she's a direct descendant of Hasidic Judaism's founder?
I never really struggled with my gender identity. I always felt like I'm a girl.
My realization was a lot more, oh, everyone thinks I'm a boy.
Abby Stein was born and raised as a male in the Hasidic community of Williamsburg. She went from being a rabbi to a trans woman and activist.
At the time, I was already married and I had a son. By the time we started expecting my son, gender started getting really hard on me once again. If it's gonna be a boy, it's gonna be a girl. What if my baby is gonna be just like me and the doctors are gonna say one thing, but in reality, it's gonna be another thing. It started punching me in the face. Everything that I've done up to that point to make it work, such as trying different prayers and hoping everything is just gonna go away, it didn't work anymore. And they're a very sheltered community that can only survive if you don't ask questions. Now I actually had these questions. I was like, I need to find answers. And I knew I'm not gonna find these answers in a kosher place, so to speak. One of the things that I knew exists that is this really, really terrible place is the internet.
In Abby's community, the internet was a threat to all their traditions and values. In 2012, 40,000 ultra-Orthodox Jews packed Citi Field to rally against the dangers of the internet.
My father is the 10th generation of the founder of the Hasidic movement. It was a very sheltered community. There was no access to internet, TV, movies. I found a public bathroom in a shopping center that had internet, and I just started sitting there for days. The way they keep you is by keeping you ignorant. I basically followed the very traditional path of, I guess, manhood within the Hasidic community. I got married when I was 18 and I had a son a year after we got married. In the beginning I was still living in the community. When I opened my first Facebook account under a female persona, I was still married. Talking to people online was really helpful. Before I started Hormones, I started a new blog called The Second Transition. I posted my coming out post, and more people started reaching out. And I actually started a support group first on Facebook for people who come from an Orthodox background. That would have never happened without the internet and social media.
If you know anything about Baal, Balenciaga, Baal means Moloch, the dark god, Babylonian god, yeah. Or some religions call him Shaitan or things of that sort. So, the founder of the Hasid movement, his name was Baal Shem Tov. So, this is going to cover about the Chabad movement. And there's two different types of Hasidic movements, and one of them is the Lavor Hasidic movement, and they seem to be fleeing and running elsewhere, and they've been accused all throughout Israeli media of being like a bad sect of Hasid, but they're welcomed in Iran, they're welcomed in Canada, and they move to different places, and they kind of accuse them of the same things that they accuse the Hamas as doing, which rape and all this type of stuff. I don't know why those accusations are very heavy being purported by everyone else. It's kind of a random thing to keep accusing someone of either being a Nazi, Hitler, or rape.
The Ohio rabbi accused of sexually assaulting a 12-year-old Baltimore County girl had his day in court today.
And tonight, a rabbi accused of molesting a child is now allowed to remove his GPS ankle monitor while on house arrest.
Jewish rabbi here in Salt Lake City, and he may be the first rabbi to actually open up about suffering sexual abuse as a child.
Administrators and guidance counselors are having serious discussions with students and parents at Salanter Akiba Riverdale Academy, also known as SAR, a modern Orthodox Jewish day school. Rabbi Jonathan Skolnick, who since last year served as middle school principal of Judaic Studies, was arrested Friday by the FBI for charges related to soliciting child pornography. He's since been fired. A criminal complaint from the U.S. Attorney's Office alleges Skolnick posed online as different teenage girls, using names like Tina Warner and Anna Fried to coerce a 14-year-old boy to send him sexually explicit photos.
Crimes of child sex abuse have shocked Australia.
Cardinal George Pell has begun giving evidence.
YMCA failed to adequately check a
now,
childcare worker's...
one devout religious community is in the spotlight.
Absolutely no one is above the law.
For the first time, what really happened inside an ultra-Orthodox Jewish sect.
We are being screwed by the community.
And shocking new revelations.
I don't recall. He just got that close to perjuring himself. That close.
Secret recordings and a cover-up to protect the predators.
You assaulted me out there.
A sordid scandal played out at a royal commission.
Did you understand it was against the law for an adult to touch the genitals of another child?
I didn't know that as a fact.
Shocked. I mean, did he really say that?
All right. New victims speak out.
Yeshiva has not ever reached out to me and apologized to me.
Whistleblowers pay a hefty price.
It felt like we were suddenly reduced to nothing.
While one paedophile finally goes public.
When I was young, I was also a victim of sexual child abuse.
Is it right for me to sit with any perpetrator?
This is the story of crimes, conspiracies, and cover-ups.
For 4 years, you've done absolutely nothing.
You stood by and let the misconceptions fester.
That's your opinion.
And how victims are making sure it never happens again.
He's here.
But yeah, most people sometimes project certain things that they're doing themselves. So anyhow, enjoy this portion.
Insufficient papers to work a real job and rapidly depleting shelters available, it's no surprise the migrants are doing whatever they can to survive, with some alleging they were even employed to dig secret underground tunnels under a famous Jewish synagogue.
Is it true they found some secret tunnels in the Jewish... They were asking me about that.
I just know that there's tunnels and that there's this one video of this guy coming out of the sewer.
What is this? Look at them all. Oh my God.
Jews, they're getting some bad PR lately.
Oh, bro, where is this guy going, dude? To get a rebate.
Yeah, what the f were those guys doing in those tunnels?
I want to fix this tonight. They need the truth. We don't do that in America.
Here's what they're doing is they're saying the 770 tunnels were used to traffic kids. All kinds of crazy rumors saying there's blood on the mattress that was pulled out the wall. Like all kinds of crazy.
A hidden tunnel was discovered under a synagogue right in the heart of Brooklyn. Hard to believe, right? Let's dig deeper into the story.
Directly to the tunnel.
Sorry, we're supposed to show an actual tunnel video. It all started when videos began circulating on social media, primarily on X, showing an altercation between Jewish Hasidic men and New York police following the discovery of a secret tunnel under the global headquarters of a Jewish movement named Chabad Lubavitch, commonly known as 770.
For years, this site at 770 Eastern Parkway was led by this world-famous rabbi, known simply as the Rebbe, who created all this. He died in 1994, but until then he had been arguing for this site to be expanded, saying we need more space. It's actually a pretty cramped space for the number of followers who are there. Well, there are some members of this sect who believe that the Rebbe's not dead. In fact, they see him as a living Messiah, and so in honor of him, there are even disputes over whether they should put a plaque up at the synagogue saying he was dead, because some people said, no, he's not.
Most of them believed he would never die. They still believe Rabbi Menachem Schneerson will be physically resurrected as Mashiach, the Messiah.
A physical resurrection when he's going to come back in his full glory imminently and redeem the entire world.
They got buckets. What the fuck?
Yeah, there was like a mattress that got pulled out that's a part of the news because people are saying there's blood on it.
It was full of blood.
What the fuck?
Look at the baby. Look at the baby stuff.
What were they doing down there?
It's a trafficking ring.
Clearwater tunnels were built.
Is it really?
Yes.
Look at this. They were going in.
There's baby clothes everywhere.
What the fuck? Yo, that shit is...
Wow, how far were they going
The property manager called in to fix the damage.
They fucked it all up.
The Rebbe never visited Israel, not once, and yet from his home in Brooklyn, he was able to influence Israeli politics. His influence was recognized by American politicians too. US presidents paid homage to him, establishing and proclaiming a National Education and Sharing Day in honor of his birthday.
And please give my warmest regards to the Rebbe on this his 86th birthday.
Menachem Mendel Schneerson was born in 1902 in the Black Sea port of Nikolaev, which was part of the Russian Empire but now part of Ukraine. He and his wife lived in Berlin and Paris before fleeing the Nazis in 1941, seeking refuge in New York, where they put down roots. A decade later, in 1951, he took over the Chabad movement from his father-in-law, who died the previous year. Menachem Schneerson revived and grew the movement for over 40 years until his death in New York in 1994. His followers in Brooklyn were devastated.
Currently, the center of the Chabadic movement is in Brooklyn, in a neighborhood called Crown Heights. So it is an American movement in terms of its center, but it is also a global movement. One of the biggest purposes of Chabad is to bring those quote-unquote lost Jews back into Judaism. So Chabad has its own rabbis and emissaries appointed all around the world. It is a global movement.
Headquartered in Brooklyn, the Chabad movement has a presence in every state in America and in over 100 countries around the world, with a particularly high focus in Europe and in Israel. A couple of years after this meeting, the Rebbe reportedly told a young Netanyahu that he would one day become Prime Minister of Israel and would be the nation's last leader before handing the scepter to the Messiah. Netanyahu is once again relying on religious language to rally the country.
The Bible says that there is a time for peace and a time for war. This is a time for war. ארצות הברית זה לא מקשה אחת, זה לא מקשה אחת. יש את הסנאט, יש את הקונגרס, יש את הכוח היהודי שהוא עצום, יותר חזק משהיה אי פעם. יש דעת קהל, יש לנו כוחות כבירים בדעת הקהל שמתנגדים למדיניות הזאת, גדולי הפרשנים. אמריקה לא תכפה עלינו דבר.
How he coming to speak in the name of the Torah, in the name of the Jewish religion, when he don't believe in the Torah, he don't believe in God?
Benjamin Netanyahu is known to be a secular Jew, but he certainly saw the value in being associated with the Rebbe.
But it also made Podolia the epicenter for a Sabbatean resurgence. When the Mannheim rabbis arrested Moses Kamenker in 1725, many of Podolia's leading Sabbatean families got spooked and fled to the Ottoman Empire, where they lived among the Donmeh. Among those who fled south was Kamenker's infant nephew, Jakob Lebovich Buchbinder, who henceforth took on the new surname Frank, a common name for Jews who crossed between Polish and Turkish territory. As an adult, Frank married into the most radical faction of the Donmeh, based in Thessaloniki. Their former leader, Beruchia Russo, claimed to be the reincarnation of Zvi, and was far more systematic in his practice of ritual violation. In fact, Russo taught that Zvi had not only overturned the ritual laws of the Torah, but also the sexual prohibitions in the book of Leviticus, thus popularizing the practice of sexual hospitality, which is exactly what it sounds like. And despite existing in this nebulous space between Judaism and Islam, Russo's faction very ostentatiously incorporated Christian beliefs, like the Holy Trinity and the concept of God incarnate. Russo had died not long before Frank was born, and when Frank entered the Thessaloniki community, He was identified as the latest incarnation of Zvi. Frank himself refrained from making any such claims, but he was most definitely a true believer in Rousseau's teachings, and upon his induction, he led the charge to revitalize Sabbateanism, starting in his native Podolia. On the night of the 27th of January 1756, in the small village of Lanskoronje, present-day Zarychanka, a handful of Jewish men were drinking at the local tavern when they heard the sound of singing from the house next door. Investigating further, they found that the house's windows were open, yet the curtains were shut, as if to deliberately invite suspicion. In fact, that's exactly what the people inside had intended. Pulling back the curtains, the curious men witnessed what can only be described as the culmination of all Sabbatean thought. In the center of the parlor was the wife of the local rabbi, topless, her hair down, covered in a bridal veil, the crown of a Torah scroll placed on her head. As Zvi had made a bride of the Torah, so his followers had made the Torah of a bride. Around her, men and women danced together, possibly naked, definitely wearing crucifixes around their necks, whilst playing music and partaking of non-kosher wine. Among the men participating in this ritual were the local rabbi, as well as the rabbis of Kshivcha and Busk, under the leadership of Jacob Frank. A brawl ensued as the eavesdropping men rushed into the house, though this was quickly dispersed by village authorities. Some arrests were made, but Frank, as an Ottoman citizen, was free to go. But it was Frank's use of the crucifix, a Christian symbol, that finally broke the rabbi's silence. From its inception, Sabbateanism had been a Zoharistic movement, based around idiosyncratic interpretations of the Kabbalistic writings of the Zohar, in opposition to the legal tradition of the Talmud and subsequent works of Jewish law.
If you ever want to know why Christians are very heavily supportive of Zionism, and you'll get to find out the founder of this. Sit back and watch.
Jacob Frank claimed to be the reincarnation of Sabbatai ZEVI, in other words, the Messiah, and the reincarnation of the biblical patriarch Jacob. And he took Sabbateanism onto an even greater level of evil and inversion. And every horror you can think of was a good thing and to be desired in this inverted cult. And what it then did was, as it did in Islam, was develop the technique of infiltrating communities and other religions. So Jacob Frank and his Sabbatian Frankists infiltrated the Roman Catholic Church. And they did it by posing as Roman Catholic believers, but really they were Sabbatian Frankists, occultists, what we would call today Satanists. They created Christian Zionism in the southern states, particularly of America, and the vast majority, overwhelming majority of Christian Zionists have no idea that that was the case.
In 1666, during the Messianic mania surrounding Shabbatai Zvi, a radical sect of Puritans called the Fifth Monarchists believed that Zvi was the second coming of Jesus, and that following his leading of the Jewish people back to Palestine, they would all convert to Christianity, a concept later revived in 1809 by the London Society for Promoting Christianity Among the Jews, most famously led by an eccentric parliamentary backbencher named Anthony Ashley Cooper, later Earl of Shaftesbury. Though these groups in their own time were known as Restorationists, they are now often retroactively dubbed Christian Zionists, either by Christian fundamentalists seeking to appropriate the Zionist movement, or by anti-Zionists seeking.
We love to give the red carpet treatment to all those lovers of Israel, those pioneers who, like Lord Shaftesbury, are changing this land for the glory of God. This is your towel, of course, and this is your internet code right over here. Naturally, you'll be wanting to know all the close restaurants as you are fulfilling Isaiah 35 verse 10. The ransom to the Lord shall return and come to Zion with songs, and everlasting joy will be on their heads. They will obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and mourning will flee away. Lord Shaftesbury, I think of him as a friend. One of my favorite Christian Zionists, just his passion to fulfill the Holy Scriptures, the promises of the Jewish people returning to what was then called Palestine. He would lobby the government In 1838, he approached Foreign Minister Palmerston and said, we must establish a consul in the land of Israel, which was then called Palestine. And it happened. This increased the ties between the empire, the British Empire, and the land of Israel. I really, really respect people, heroes like Lord Shaftesbury, who pioneer in fulfilling God's word.
Practical, biblical education and training for Christians around the world, serving the people and land of Israel with unconditional love and an uncompromising faith.
Zionism began as an evangelical Christian project before it became a Jewish one. That the whole idea that the return of the Jews to Palestine is part of a divine scheme that will precipitate the second coming of the Messiah, the resurrection of the dead, and maybe the beginning of 1,000 years of Jesus's rule on earth. Now, it was not every evangelical stream in thinking that thought that way, but it was an important part of evangelical Christianity, beginning in Britain and transformed into the United States by people who at first you could call them theologians rather than politicians, but very soon some of them became politicians of importance, and they, especially in Britain, they provided a certain theological justification for a new imperial thinking, not just about Palestine, but of the whole Eastern Mediterranean, the Mashreq. Because the British basic view on the Eastern Mediterranean throughout the 19th century was that although the Ottoman Empire that ruled that area was in decline, it was better to keep it intact, because a disintegration of the empire would create a struggle for spoils among the European powers and could lead to something which would be called later on a world war, which in fact is what happened. But the pressure of those evangelical Christians who, together with British imperialists, who thought that it's time to cede from the Ottoman Empire the Eastern Mediterranean, brought together, first of all, a non-Jewish support for the idea of what they would call the return of the Jews to Palestine and the replacement of the Palestinian with a Jewish kingdom or state or republic, depends on who we are talking about. Now, it means that already throughout the 19th century, people were discussing the fate of Palestine and the Palestinians without the Palestinians being aware that they are becoming a regional project or even a global project of colonization.
And there came a point, again, I'm being as brief as I can, where Jacob Frank, with this inverted satanic religion, hooked up with Mayer Amschel Rothschild, the founder of the Rothschild dynasty, and a Sabbatean Frankist. Not a Jewish person, no, a Sabbatean Frankist. The Sabbatean Frankism religion, or what you call it, cult. And those two then hooked up with a guy called Adam Weishaupt, and together they created an organization called the Illuminati, called the Bavarian Illuminati to start with.
Now we're going to go into Adam Weishaupt, Mayer Rothschild, and Jacob Frank, which we just spoke about, and them coming together and forming the Bavarian Illuminati, which was found in the year 1776, May 1776. What year was the United States founded? Month, July 1776. Yeah, this is interesting, but sit back and enjoy. You might get to learn a thing or two about the divided states and their connections and beginnings with It's Real.
Sabbatai Zevi declared himself to be the Jewish Messiah in the year 1666. This false Messiah led the largest Messiah movement in Jewish history and attracted more than half the population of European Jews. How did he do it? By promising to return the Jews to their ancestral homeland in Palestine. Sabbatai Zevi made everything that was holy unholy. He rejected the rules of the Jewish holy books and every standard of Jewish decency. There would be no more guilt or sin or right or wrong, no more sexual taboos, no more 10 Commandments, no more fasting. Instead, there would be feasting. Sabbatai Zevi's immoral leadership finally fell from grace when the Sultan of Turkey threatened him with torture unless he converted to Islam. Sabbatai converted to Islam, but he brought his infectious evil theology with him. 1 century later, Jacob Frank proclaimed himself to be the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi and the living Messiah for all Jews. Not even Sabbatai Zevi was as evil as Jacob Frank and his disciples. Jacob Frank rejected traditional Judaism. He reversed the truth and told his followers, since we can't all be saints, let's all be sinners. The best way to imitate God, said Frank, is to cross every boundary, transgress every taboo, and mix, as God did, the sacred with the profane. Orgies, incest, rape, and sexual intercourse with children, including sodomy on young boys, were no longer sinful. In 1773, Jacob Frank traveled to Frankfurt, Germany, the birthplace of the Illuminati. That's where he formed an unholy alliance with Adam Weishaupt and Mayor Amschel Rothschild's banking dynasty. The ambition of the Rothschild dynasty was to win control of the world's gold, central banks, and wealth. The Rothschilds sent John Jacob Astor, Jacob Schiff, and Paul Warburg to America, where they influenced the privatization of the Federal Reserve banking system and the dismantling of the American Constitution. The goal of Weishaupt and the Jesuits was to take control of the Vatican and its hierarchy of Catholic clergy. Weishaupt formed the Order of the Illuminati and infiltrated the Freemasonic lodges with his doctrine until every Masonic lodge in every nation accepted it. The Frankist goal was the destruction and replacement of Jewish ethics with a satanic religion based on the exact opposite of Jewish teachings. When this unholy alliance of conscienceless men was seeded, a cancerous war against humanity erupted. With Rothschild financing, Jacob Frank became fabulously wealthy and was put in charge of spreading a Luciferian theology that would be the hidden hand behind future wars and revolutions. Jacob Frank's followers were called Sabbatian Frankists. They practiced witchcraft and occult rituals, including animal and human sacrifices. Lucifer, they declared, was the true God. The Sabbatian Frankists expanded their movement by masquerading as converts to other religions. They converted to Catholicism and to Islam, where they embedded themselves and spread their Luciferian infection as closeted crypto-Jews. The Frankists traded their wives and daughters with members and with powerful non-members who they needed to seduce into their cult. Jewish professor Gershon Scholem called Jacob Frank one of the most frightening men in Jewish history. By 1776, Orthodox Jewish rabbis and leaders rejected Jacob Frank and the pagan invasion of evil that took hold in 18th century Europe. They declared Jacob Frank and his Luciferian followers to be heretics. Jewish author and historian Dr. Henry Makow has thoroughly researched the Sabbatian Frankist movement.
The Sabbatian Frankists were out and out Satanists. They believe that they have to defy any kind of natural morality, defy any kind of natural law, defy God, and they actually indulge in every kind of depravity as a form of worship, because they worship Satan. And they promoted promiscuity, and that's where our promiscuity today comes from. it's 200 or 300 years old. There's nothing new or avant-garde about it. They promoted incest, they promoted pedophilia, and every kind of sexual depravity.
America's Zionist-owned media falsely reported that Iran's President Ahmadinejad threatened to wipe Israel off the map. This was a mistranslation. What the president of Iran really said is that Israel is occupying Palestine and has no legitimacy on the world map. Traditional Torah Jews and rabbis agree with him. There is speculation that the revolutionary document called the Protocols of Zion is a secret Sabbatean Frankist document. This document embodies 24 protocols which map out a detailed Zionist plan for global control. The protocols, written in the late 1700s, describe in precise detail the world domination plan that is unfolding today. Rabbi Marvin Antelman charges that the world today is ruled by a Sabbatean Frankist satanic cult that has conspired with the Illuminati to destroy all religions and fuse all nations into one.
I have joining me today Dr. and Rabbi Marvin Antelman. Welcome to the show, Rabbi.
Thank you very much for having me here. First of all, let me say this. There are a lot of conspiracy theories out there. I'm not interested in theories. I'm interested in facts. So the scholarship over the years that I've utilized are sources that are impeccable. A man by the name of Sabbati Zvi, who was born in 1626 and died in 1676, came along and said, I am the Messiah. And he had a tremendous following. When it was realized that his following was so great, there would be problems, the Sultan gave Shabbatai a choice. Either you die or convert to Islam. So he converted. Now, there were about 1 million followers prior to the conversion. When the conversion happened, then there was disillusionment among the Jews. But there were some diehard people who set up different cults of Shabbatai Zvi. And the worst one of them was called the Donmeh, which was a secret organization. And the Donmeh was based in Turkey and in Salonika. And the Donmeh gave rise to these terrible orgies that went on, which became part of the immorality theology of Shabbatai Zvi, corrupted later on. He apostatized himself 10 years before his death. So when he died in 1676, he had these cults doing all kinds of evil.
And the reason that these followers of Shabbatai Zvi were doing evil was because what?
Here's the thing. The Talmud says that the Messiah would come when everybody's good or everybody's bad. There is such a saying in the Talmud. So the Sabbatians said like this: it's impossible for everybody to be good, it's easy to be bad. So they turned around the Torah and they said, if you do an evil deed, then you will use up the energy of the universe, and it'll collapse, and you'll force the Messiah to come because you will have used up all the evil in the world. So whenever they engage in an orgy, they would make a bracha, and every day they would figure out a way to do as many sins as possible. Like if you eat chaylev, you're chayav karet. In other words, if you eat fat, according to the Torah, you're to be excommunicated from your people. So they would eat fat that was prohibited, non-kosher fat, from a kosher animal, which is chaylev, which is in that category, like eating blood from a kosher animal.
So they would dafka do the opposite.
They do the opposite
in order to hasten the
coming of the Messiah. After Shabbatai Zvi died, one of the most powerful Sabbatian cults, as they were called, was a transformation of the Donmeh, the most extreme cult, to Europe through an insidious person by the name of Jacob Frank. He died in 1791. Now the Frankists started to spread and take over entire communities and make them satanic. And you can actually trace a line historically, which I do in my book, to the CFR from Shabbatai Zvi, and another organization called the Illuminati, which was founded in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt. And they were involved also in the French Revolution, which is also well documented.
So what you're saying is that there really does exist a new world order, that it's not a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy.
Right, and Professor Katz wrote a book called The Jews and Freemasonry, which gives a history of the interface between Jews and some of the cults that derived out of Shabbatai Zvi. But the next big cult that came from Shabbatai Zvi after the Donmeh organization, which is in Turkey, the next big cult were the Frankists, as I mentioned with Jacob Frank. So Jacob Frank, the Vad Arba Ratzah, the Council of Four Lands, wanted to deal with Frank, and they decided to have a big excommunication on the 20th of Sivan 250 years ago. And there, they made the following rulings. They said everybody that is a Frankist is to be excommunicated.
From the Jewish people.
From the Jewish people, bastards to the 10th generation, is what it said. And they prohibited people, because the Frankists were into Kabbalah, they prohibited the study of Kabbalah until you were 30 or 40 years old and you had a belly full, as they said, full of Talmud. Only then could you study the Kabbalah.
Right.
And they said they're women or whores, and they're hereby excommunicated from our people to the 10th generation.
This is what the Council of Four Lands labeled the Frankists,
Right.
because they so deviated from Judaism and all that Judaism holds to be true and righteous. These people went off and made basically their own deformed religion, and so the Jews wanted nothing to do with them. They kicked them out.
That is correct.
Are there non-Jews that joined this Sabbatian cult?
No, non-Jews did not join the Sabbatean cult, but the non-Jews did join the Illuminati.
Frankist movement was a front organization for Illuminists, believing that one achieves purity through sin. Thus, we find Frankists practicing sex orgies. While such ideas were foreign to Orthodox Jews, they were not strange or alien to the predominantly Gentile Illuminist movement. As a matter of fact, in his writings, the Illuminist Adam Weishaupt called for the abolition of all ordered forms of religion, and that syncs up perfectly with what the Frankists were trying to achieve. The story of the Frankists begins really not with the founder of the movement, Jacob Frank, but with Sabbati Zvi or ZEVI, a claimed Messiah and Kabbalist.
And he was a Turkish fellow, is that right?
That's correct. Sabbati Zvi founded the Donmeh Sect, a group which became rather large in the Ottoman Empire. And Sabbatai does not appear to have been insane. He knew what he was doing when he made this declaration of being
and this
Messiah.
was in the 1600s, was it?
Yes, that's correct. The rationale put forward was that because Sabbatai was the Messiah, he had the authority to abolish the religious observances of traditional Judaism. And he began moving in this direction by declaring the 10th of Tevet no longer a day of fasting, but a day of feasting. Sabbatai claimed that he had been promised a consort in a dream, and that consort was to be an unchaste woman. And there was a woman that was living in Livorno named Sarah that became his choice pick. She was a prostitute who claimed that she was to become the bride of the Messiah. So she was brought to Cairo and married to Sabbatai and fell into the role quite nicely and helped to confirm his messiahship, at least in the eyes of his followers. This group taught Jacob Frank. We see that there is these heretical beliefs with Jacob Frank from his earliest days, that he was probably brought up in it from childhood on. So Jacob Frank began holding secret meetings in 1755 where he preached ideas that were antithetical to the Orthodox Judaism. One gathering in a place called Landskron was so egregious and just so much outrageous nonsense went on there that it drew the attention of the authorities in the area. It drew the attention of the rabbis, And as a result, a rabbinical court was held in Satanov, a village, where many of Frank's followers confessed to all sorts of outrageous sexual immorality. Frank had to leave Podolia in, I believe it was 1756, because of the mixing of sex orgies with religion. And Jacob Frank would declare himself to be a direct successor to Sabbatai Zvi. And he would tell his followers to convert to Christianity as a kind of a phase, a transitional kind of phase, to the future religion, which was supposed to be a Messianic religion, with, of course, Jacob Frank sitting at the forefront of it.
Right, now there was a huge amount of occultism and Kabbalism, and you said Masonicism within Frankist cult.
That's correct.
Today, royals, politicians, banksters, and businessmen form the inner circle of the Sabbatean Frankist elite. They live secret, two-faced lives, sometimes posing as religious Jews or Christians or Islamists. Modern Zionism is rooted in the unholy alliance of Frank, Weishaupt, and Rothschild. It has infiltrated world religions, taken over Freemasonry, engineered wars and revolutions, and turned nations and citizens into their debt slaves worldwide. Unfortunately, Muslims, Christians, and Jews do not recognize their common enemy because that enemy is invisible. It hides within their own religions. The enemy also hides within the activist community. It finances big-budget documentaries and movements. The end game is to sell a divisive, anti-capitalist, atheistic message and deliver trusting followers right into the lap of a communist New World Order.
New World Order, Mr. Rothschild?
What?
New World Order? Depopulation?
Oh, listen, who are you...
Genocide?
Who are you televising for?
We just want to let you know the New World Order has no legitimacy, and that we as a people are not afraid, and we are waking up to the robber barons and the big banksters who are looting this economy with the Federal Reserve.
Well,
what do you, I mean, the Rothschilds family did start the Federal, they divided Europe first, took over Europe, the Napoleon.
Don't exaggerate.
And interestingly, this cult, its Bible is the Kabbalah, the esoteric, mystical work of the Jewish belief system.
Bernhard's famous co-star, Roseanne Barr, as well as Mick Jagger, Ashton Kutcher, Demi Moore, Ariana Grande, and Madonna all dabbled in Kabbalah study. Celebrities across Hollywood were spotted wearing the popular red string amulet. Madonna's countless trips to Israel only further cemented Kabbalah's place in the mainstream. In 2003, she even shelled out $5 million to help open a Kabbalah center in London. Yet, Kabbalah today is still divisive. To many, the Bergs were inspirational people.
The aging pop star had recently done a photo shoot in which she portrayed herself as Jesus in a display that mocked Jesus' Last Supper, where he instituted the communion service that millions upon millions of Christians have done for over 2,000 years. And she even used such displays to normalize the very performances that have become commonplace at the Grammys. She also prophetically spoke of how she would use her homoerotic videos to normalize homosexual behavior to Middle America, where it was not yet accepted.
And particularly a book in the Kabbalah called the Zohar. And Zohar means radiance, illuminated, and that's where Illuminati came from. And they then went about from 1776, when it started, infiltrating all these different communities and religions, and they took them over. And it was the Rothschild, Sabbatean Frankist cult that created Israel.
In 1883, Baron Edmund de Rothschild agreed to bail out the settlement of Shomron with some much-needed investments on the condition that the village be renamed after his late father, Zichron Yaakov. The same year, he helped establish another village in the south, named Mazkeret Batya after his mother. Taken together, this wave of Jewish immigration came to be known somewhat controversially as the First Aliyah, and those who participated in it were known as Chovevei Zion, or Lovers of Zion, from which auto-emancipation came to be known by a new term, Zionism. Following his 3 visits to Palestine in the 1820s and 30s, Sir Moses Montefiore began to set up financial and educational initiatives to bring Western-style agricultural practices to the region. Though devoutly religious himself, Montefiore was the first Jewish figure of the modern era to conceive of Aliyah beyond the scope of religion, envisioning Palestine as much as a safe haven for Jews fleeing persecution elsewhere as a place for religious fulfillment. Montefiore also initiated a program to expand the city of Jerusalem beyond its medieval walls, not only drawing Jews out of the crowded old city, but also from outlying cities like Hebron and Safed, as well as from abroad. And by the time the Zionist movement had begun in earnest, Jerusalem was already a predominantly Jewish city. This proto-Zionism struggled to gain traction among the masses, in no small part because their efforts were concentrated in Western Europe, where Jews already had full political rights and the Industrial Revolution had brought considerable prosperity. Palestine, meanwhile, was desperately poor, depopulated, and devastated by centuries of deforestation by the Romans and neglect by subsequent powers. The region had no sewage systems, no electricity, no railroads, no industry. The militant agrarianism championed by the proto-Zionists appealed little to their urban peers, and it's telling that of the 5 men I mentioned, only Al-Khalai made Aliyah himself. Even the agricultural settlements that already existed were struggling to survive, as participating families quickly fled to the relative prosperity of the cities. In 1871, Odessa was one of the most diverse cities in the world. While ethnic Russians constituted the largest share of the population, it was also home to the second largest Jewish population of any city in the world, as well as sizable communities of Armenians, Tatars, Italians, Turks, and Greeks. Odessa's semi-Mediterranean location, diversity, and importance as a trading hub made it the intellectual center of Jewish pluralism and politics in Eastern Europe. But all of those factors also made the Jews of Odessa easy targets for violence whenever there was tension between one or more groups. In 1871, when the city's Greek church was vandalized during the Orthodox Easter, Greek and later Russian communities engaged in 3 days of rioting against the Jews, whom they simply presumed to be guilty for religious reasons. Much of the city was destroyed, while the Russian military and law enforcement stood idly by. In Odessa, a 52-year-old doctor named Leon Pinsker became the face of this disillusionment. Pinsker was a second-generation maskil and secularist who had been raised in the movement to revive the Hebrew language, and had spent most of his life as an advocate for Jewish emancipation in Russia. With the assassination of Emperor Alexander II, the outbreak of pogroms across Ukraine, and the implementation of numerous anti-Jewish laws, Pinsker came to his conclusion that Jews were everywhere foreigners except for their indigenous homeland, and would never be accepted as equals among nations unless they achieved equality as a nation. On New Year's Day, 1882, he published his pamphlet Auto-Emancipation. Just 10 days after its release, the Romanian rabbi and linguist Moses Gaster joined with several other Jewish leaders at the Focșani Congress. Romania was yet another nation where Jewish emancipation seemed to be a lost cause, and the Congress thus endeavored to establish an agricultural village for Romanian refugees in Palestine known as Shomron, or Samaria. Shortly after that, university students in Ukraine formed the Palestine Pioneers, or Bilu, who by the end of the year had established the new towns of Rishon LeZion and Rosh Pinah, soon followed by Yesud HaMa'ala. Far to the south in Yemen, a ruling dynasty of Zaidi imams had enforced severe anti-Jewish laws since the 17th century, and life within the Jewish community was extremely chaotic, with frequent pogroms, forced relocations, and multiple messianic claimants in just the 19th century alone. During that period, the Yemenites were visited by the rabbi and anthropologist Yaakov Safir, who helped suppress the messianic cults of personality and encouraged the Jews to find peace and security in his home of Palestine. In the decades following the Ottoman conquest of Yemen in 1872, some 2,500 souls took up Safir's offer, making up 10% of Jewish immigrants. The situation was similar in the Emirate of Bukhara, where the Russian invasion of 1868 ended years of war and banditry, inspiring rabbis Shlomo Musayev and Shimon Chacham to establish the Bukharan quarter in Jerusalem, though their motivations were more traditionally religious than humanitarian.
My sons, when I go, I leave you in your mama's care. She is wise, far wiser than I, and good. Do always as she says, and you will grow rich. Come closer. Much money is lost through sending gold by coach from one country to another. In times of war, it is seized by the enemy. In times of peace, by thieves. You are 5 brothers. I want you each to start a banking business in a different country. One to go and open a house in Paris, one in Vienna, one in London. Choose the most important centers, so that when money is to be sent from here to London, let us say, you won't have to risk life and gold and Shem here in Frankfurt. We'll just send a letter to Nathan in London saying, pay so-and-so. And that will be offset by loans from London to Frankfurt. Understand? Yes.
So it's possibly the most famous letter in modern Jewish history, and it begins with 3 words. Dear Lord Rothschild.
His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment of Palestine as a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine.
And here it is, the Balfour Declaration. What do you feel when you see it here?
I genuinely feel it's one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of the Jewish people. If you think it took 3,000 years to get to this, and then you say, how did this miracle happen? It's the most incredible piece of opportunism. I mean, if you think you had an impoverished would-be scientist, Chaim Weizmann, who somehow gets to England, meets a few people, including members of my family, seduces them. He has such great charm and conviction. He gets to Balfour, and he unbelievably persuades Balfour and Lloyd George, the Prime Minister, and most of the ministers, that this idea of the national home for Jews should be allowed to take place. I mean, it's so unlikely. And then he's, starts to fight a difficult battle with the British cabinet, and this letter goes through 5 drafts, as you know. And in the end, it comes out as a rather compromising letter. I mean, the essential point is there for the Jewish community to fasten on to. You have the first bit, which promises a national home rather than the national home, and then you have the bit that nothing that's to be done should in any way harm the Arab community.
And is behind, indeed is the Saudi royal family today, is the inner circle of so many of these organizations. And I show in the book in a chapter called
The founders of Israel and the Saudi royal family are linked.
Absolutely.
Which would be shocking to hear for most people.
But it wouldn't if you do the research, because in the background, the Israeli government and the Saudi royal family have been close. And what's happened since the emergence of this utter psychopath called the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who was involved in this horrific murder of Jamal Khashoggi in Turkey, they have become even close in the public arena in many ways, because they are all basically, if you like, Donmeh in their different forms. And in the book, in a chapter called Atlantic Crossing, I show how this Sabbati and Frankist cult moved in on America and took over American politics, not least through phenomenal, staggering levels of funding, infiltrated the CIA, infiltrated the National Security Agency, the Pentagon, and from that were able to direct inner networks within these organizations, think compartmentalization, which together were behind 9/11.
It's all smoke and mirror with Donald. Donald is a businessman at the end of the day. He will see what is the best interest of his country. And in the best interest of his country is to create more competition. Whatever he's saying, which is anti-immigration, anti-Muslims, this is all just to appease the right of the voting population. Once he becomes president, if he becomes a president, I think he would be clever not to go the path that he has been beating the drums about. It is detriment to his own interest and detriment to the interest in general of United States people.
So you wouldn't mind doing business with him? Is that what you're saying?
I'm a businessman and I will even do business with devil as long it is win-win for both. I'm a businessman and I will even do business with devil as long it is win-win for both.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that episode. Stay tuned for the next part. Much love. Peace.
They not like us. 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 You think the Bay gon' let you disrespect Pop, nigga? I think that Oakland show gon' be your last stop, nigga. They cold foul, I don't know why you still pretending. What is the owl? Bird niggas and bird bitches, go. The audience not dumb, shape the stories how you want. Hatred, they're not slow. Rabbit hole is still deep, I can go further, I promise. Ain't that some B-Rex, that's for bitchin'. You Malibu most wanted, ain't no love boy, you ball boy, fresh Gatorade or something. Since 2009, I had this bitch jumping. You niggas will get a wedgie, be flipped over your boxes or over your foe. The other vaginal option, pussy, nigga better straighten they posture. Got flavors all up in content, might write this for the doctrine. Tell a pop star quit hiding, fuck a caption, won't action, no accident. I'm hands on, he fuck around, get polished. Fucked on Wayne growing, he was in jail, that's conniving. Then get his face tatted like a bitch apologizing. I'm glad D-Rose came home, y'all didn't deserve him neither. From Alondra down to Central, nigga better not speak on Serena. And your homeboy needs subpoena, that predator moving flocks. That name gotta be registered and placed on neighborhood watch. I lean on you niggas like another line of walk. Yeah, it's all eyes on me and I'ma send it up the pot. Ay, put the roll label on me, I'ma get them dropped. Ay, reaching music and I won't